Good morning. It is really good to see y'all today. If we haven't met yet, my name is John. I'm the convener here at Valley and Mountain. And today, in place of what we normally call a reflection, it's kind of like a sermon, we've got a community open mic. We like to do this on occasion for a lot of reasons. One is because there's so much wisdom and brilliance and experience in the room that it's good to give space for some of that. And another reason is to remind ourselves that this is a co-created community. It's our theology here isn't one where somebody's got all the answers and everybody else doesn't. It's a place where we come together to share our experiences, our wisdom, our questions, our struggles, and we grow deeper because of that. So it's an open mic today, and the kind of guiding question that we have is about this liminal experience. When have you been in a threshold in your life? When have you been in between places? So this word liminal, which we talked a lot about last week, describes when you're kind of neither here nor there, when you are betwixt in between different phases in your life. There's often kind of an idea that to go from one identity or one place to another place, it's almost like an instant thing and you're just supposed to kind of be different. But there is a passageway, there is a tunnel, there is a river that you've got to cross, there's a valley you've got to go through, a mountain you've got to climb, that it takes to go through an honest and a real change. So today we're going to invite you to share some about that. It might be that you are in one right now and you don't have sight of the other side of this, and that's okay here. We want to hear stories of inspiration also, like where you've been in the past and how you got out of that. This is a place for inspiration and testimony and hope, but it's also a place where your questions and your doubts and your I don't know where this goes from here. Those feelings and those struggles are welcome here too, and we grow deeper as a community when we can be vulnerable about not knowing how we get out. The scripture that is guiding us in this today is what Ethan read so beautifully 3 times in a row to kind of get us deeper and deeper into it. This is at the very beginning of the Gospel of Mark, and Mark is one of the 4 sort of portraits of Jesus we find in the New Testament, these stories of his life. And it's right at the beginning because Jesus goes into the wilderness. We're in the season of Lent right now in the church calendar, which is a 40-day period of kind of going into the wilderness, of doing real deep dive into ourselves, our lives, our struggles, our questions, trying to bear ourselves before the divine. And the kind of inspiration for Lent is this experience that Jesus did, where he goes out into the desert. And it is his liminal place, it is his threshold experience in between, where he's just been living his life for 30-odd years, kind of getting ready and preparing. Then he gets baptized, which is basically rooting himself in an alternative kingdom to the kingdom of Caesar and the empire. So he's rejected the empire by doing this baptism thing. But before he can begin his ministry, he has to go through this tunnel, this liminal, this threshold experience. And that's this desert time. And I think it's beautiful. The scripture says that he goes into the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by the adversary, and he was with the wild beasts. And the wild beasts, I mean, each of us is with the wild beasts. If you have been in a real threshold, if you have been in a liminal place, if you've been in between things and you don't have the answers, you know what it means to be with the wild beasts. These voices that are telling you no, and you should go back, and you don't know what you're doing, and you're not enough, and there's nothing on the other side, and it would be safer to go back to where you were before, and this was a huge mistake. These are the wild beasts that we face when we are between and betwixt, when we are in the borderlands. We are confronted with the wild beasts in our own heads and in the world around us. And if you know the scripture, you might also realize that it sounded a little different. It says that Jesus was tempted by the adversary in what we read today. In the traditional translation from Greek, it says tempted by Satan. Now, Satan is a word from the Hebraic, which is Satan, and it's not a capitalized S in Satan. Satan wasn't thought of as a name of somebody. Satan was a Hebrew word that meant an adversary, someone who spoke against you, who accused you, who attacked you. And so then this was kind of developed into the idea of Satan as we think of it today. But I feel like there's more power in going back to that kind of original understanding of the adversary, being tempted by that accusing voice, that voice that puts obstacles in your way, that enemy of where you are trying to go and what you are trying to do, rather than having people kind of wrestle with, do I believe in a embodied person called Satan? Being tempted by the adversary. So wherever you are today in your journey, if you are willing to share some about when you have been in that tunnel place, we would love to hear from you. I'm going to share just the open mic guidelines, which are in here together, and this will help us to have kind of an experience that tries to, where we're together and unified in what we're trying to do. So I'm just going to briefly read these, and ask you to, by coming forward, to agree to them. So one, share the airtime. We want to make sure that there's enough space for people to go, and the children's ministry, has a limited attention span. The kids, I should say, that the adults are awesome, but we want to make sure that we contain the experience so that they can come back and join us again. So we're asking you to keep it about 3 minutes, and Mari's going to be our timekeeper here with her bell. She's going to ring this at when? 2 minutes. At 2, and kind of give you a sense, okay, I got about a minute left. And then ring it again at 3 to ask you to wrap it up. So share the airtime so there's just enough space for other people to share their stories. To speak about your own experience, please don't deny or minimize others. So say somebody said something, if you want to come up and say, that was wrong. Try to keep it into your own experience. Avoid fixing or unsolicited advice. Honor the topic by sticking to it. So if you've got a great idea about what you'd like to talk about today, but it's not on this topic, we invite you to talk to one of us on staff, and we would love to create another celebration for different topics. Practice grace and kindness. And then finally, we're trying to figure out a way to deal with the fact that sometimes when we share in community, there are things that can be said that can really hurt. And so we're trying to find a process for that. We're going to try this one out, that if something does hurt today and you just need to say something, you can say, ouch. And then we know that there's something that we need to kind of address. And it might not be right here in this moment, but it might be something that we can address very soon thereafter. So we can work through that. So does that sound good? Sound good? Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, luckily we have a volunteer who's going to come forward to do our first thing. And it's going to be really good. So don't feel pressure to be. This is not a competition. It's not a speaking competition. This is a space of community sharing. And Tiffany has prepared a poem to deepen this, to really drive it home. So thank you, Tiffany.
This poem is called Little Birds, and I wrote it last week. Fly, little birds, fly. Fly over the obstacles that being here can create. Fly from the nightmares of our past that we hate. Fly towards a future of equality and hope we're not late. Fly for those who fled from their towns and are now being forced back because they're different shades of brown. Run, little birds, run. Run from the injustice threatening to drag us back. Run from the wall of paperwork pulling us into the black. Run when your wings can no longer fly. Run until they start to question themselves why, and they begin to understand our calls and cries. Walk, little birds, walk. Walk under the blistering heat of the desert lands. Walk through the raging waters and rough sands. Walk right into these confusing borderlands, and walk until there is no longer a blowing wind, and they put these restricting laws to an end. And lastly, sit, little birds, sit. They'll soon realize they're the same as you and me. Sit, little birds, sit. Be little birds until you're free little birds.
Thank you, everybody, for the stories. Sarah, you really wrapped it up perfectly, so I don't have much to say, except, in the scripture, I talked before about the wild beasts and the adversary that accost Jesus in this time in the wilderness, because I feel like when we are in the liminal spaces, the barriers get stripped away, and we're more vulnerable to things that can harm us, and yet we're also more vulnerable to things that can help us, because Jesus doesn't just find the adversary and the wild beasts in the wilderness. It says the angels waited on him. So there are also angels, there is also blessing, there is also possibility, there is also the Spirit of God that we can find and that can heal us in the wilderness. And I pray for those in the room who are in that place of in between and wondering, is there something on the other side, that you would feel the presence of those angels of God, of love. Amen.